A kingdom of light and living architecture stretches beyond the horizon. Walls that breathe, floors that remember every footstep. A palace so ancient it has forgotten how to be still. Inside its greatest hall, a throne sits elevated above 100 silent figures. A queen watches from it, unmoving, unreadable. A court holds its breath around her, waiting for a diplomat they have never met. The doors open without sound. A man steps through, alone, human, out of place in every way that matters. But before he can speak, before the first word of diplomacy leaves his mouth, a child appears, small, barefoot, moving past armed guards like they are furniture. She walks straight to the stranger, ignores her mother, ignores the court, ignores every protocol her bloodline demands. She climbs into his arms, grips his coat, and falls asleep. The queen rises from her throne. No one in the room knows what happens next. Part 1: The Stranger in the Palace. The palace was breaking, not slowly, not with warning. The walls cracked from the inside out, like bones giving up, like something alive deciding it no longer wanted to hold itself together. And in the center of it all, a child, small, still, eyes wide open but seeing nothing that belonged to the present. Energy poured out of her in waves, not fire, not light, something worse, something older. The kind of force that doesn't burn, it unravels, thread by thread, molecule by molecule. The air around her shimmered and split. The floor beneath her feet turned pale, then white, then nothing. Queen Rivara stood 20 steps away. 20 steps, that was all. She had crossed battlefields. She had walked through the aftermath of wars that erased entire cities from memory. 20 steps should have been nothing, but she could not move, because every time she tried, every time her body leaned forward, the energy pushed back, not violently, not with hatred, with something far worse: fear. The child was afraid, and her fear had become a weapon she didn't know how to put down. Lyra, Rivara's voice, steady, controlled. The voice of a queen who had never once allowed herself to break in front of her people. Lyra, I am here. No response. The child's hands hung at her sides, trembling, her long ears pressed flat against her head. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, just breath. Ragged, shallow, the kind of breathing that comes right before someone stops breathing altogether. And behind her, on the floor, a man, face down, one arm bent at an unnatural angle beneath his body, still, completely still. Rivara looked at him, then at her daughter, then at the ceiling, which was no longer a ceiling, just open sky where solid architecture used to be. Lyra, softer now, almost a whisper. Please. The child did not hear her, or maybe she did, and that was worse. The light surged, the walls groaned. Something deep inside the palace, something ancient and structural and irreplaceable, snapped. Darkness. 3 days earlier, the doors to the throne chamber opened without sound, which Theron found deeply unsettling. Doors, in his experience, were supposed to creak or hiss, or at least make some kind of polite announcement that they existed. A little squeak, a modest groan, something that said, hey, heads up, someone is entering. These doors did none of that. They simply parted, like reality itself had decided to step aside and let him through. Cool, great, no pressure. I took one careful step forward. The floor responded. A faint glow appeared beneath his boots, pale blue, tracing his movement in soft lines that spread outward like ripples in still water. Each step he took, recorded, displayed, judged, right. So the floor is watching me. That's fine, totally normal. He took another step. The glow followed, obedient, precise, like a very polite spotlight that refused to let him be anonymous. The chamber stretched far beyond what should have been architecturally possible. Its curved walls moved with subtle motion, breathing. That was the only word for it. The building was breathing, slow, rhythmic, alive in a way that made Theron's spine consider filing for early retirement. Tall figures stood along both sides of the chamber. Court members, he assumed, each one composed, still, watching him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for suspects or disappointing meals. No one blinked, no one shifted, no one did anything remotely welcoming. Theron's brain, which had been carefully briefed on protocol, on gestures, on respectful posture and appropriate diplomatic phrases, chose this exact moment to replace every single instruction with one helpful thought. Try not to be weird. Thanks, very useful. At the far end of the chamber, elevated, impossible to ignore, sat Queen Rivara. She did not move as he approached, did not lean forward, did not tilt her head, did not acknowledge his existence in any visible way. And yet, her presence filled the space more completely than the architecture did, more than the glowing floor, or more than the breathing walls, more than every silent figure standing at attention. She was simply there, and that was enough. Her long ears angled slightly back, not aggressively, thoughtfully, like someone listening to a question that hadn't been asked yet. Her eyes settled on him with a steadiness that suggested she had already made several assessments and was now simply waiting to see if he would confirm or disappoint them. Theron stopped walking. He hoped the distance was appropriate. There had been instructions about that, specific measurements, exact paces, but his brain had helpfully deleted those too. So he went with instinct. Instinct said this feels about right. Instinct also said you are absolutely going to mess this up. He inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, not a nod. Something in between that he hoped communicated respect without suggesting he'd practiced it in a mirror, which he had, twice. Your Majesty. His voice came out calm, controlled, a small miracle. Thank you for receiving me. Silence. Not the awkward kind, not the hostile kind, the deliberate kind, the kind that said, I heard you, and I am choosing when to respond, and you will wait. So he waited. Seconds passed, each one longer than the last, which was scientifically impossible, but emotionally very real. Then Rivara spoke. We observe before we respond. Her voice carried easily through the vast chamber, smooth, clear, like water over polished stone. It is our way. Theron nodded once. That's fair. I tend to talk first and regret it later. So you're probably handling this better than I would. A shift moved through the court, not quite amusement, but something adjacent, something that suggested he had not yet completely destroyed the fragile diplomatic scaffolding of this moment. Good. Promising. He straightened slightly, resisting the urge to adjust his jacket, which he had already adjusted 9 times on the walk-in. A 10th would be excessive, probably. I was told this meeting was important, he said. It is. That was not elaborated on. Theron waited. Then, after a moment, I appreciate the clarification. This time there was definitely a ripple of restrained reaction among the court. Not laughter. These people did not seem like the laughing type. But something. A loosening. A softening at the edges. Progress. Theron allowed himself one small breath of relief, and then the doors behind him opened. Again, without sound. But this time, there were footsteps, soft, uneven, unconcerned with ceremony, the kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who had never once in their life worried about making an entrance, because they didn't need to. Theron turned slightly, just enough to see without breaking whatever fragile diplomatic shape he was currently holding together with willpower and anxiety. A small figure entered the chamber, moving past the towering guards without hesitation, without looking up, without slowing down, like the armed sentinels flanking her path were furniture, background noise, irrelevant. Princess Lyra. He recognized her immediately, not from briefings, not from the intelligence files he'd been given, but from the way the room reacted. The shift was invisible to anyone not paying attention, but Theron was paying attention, He was paying very close attention because his survival instincts were screaming at him that something significant was happening, and they were right. She was smaller than he expected, younger too, her long ears, softer and less defined than her mother's, framed a face that seemed distant, present in body but not in mind. Like her thoughts existed somewhere just out of reach of the current moment, somewhere safer, somewhere quieter, somewhere that wasn't here. She walked forward, not toward the queen, not toward the court, not toward anyone in particular, except, oh, except him. Theron's brain, which had been performing reasonably well up to this point, began sending increasingly urgent messages that all said roughly the same thing. She is walking toward you. Yes, I can see that. She is still walking toward you. Yes, still aware. She is walking directly toward you and no one is stopping her. That part. That was the part that made everything tilt because no one moved. No guard stepped forward. No attendant intercepted. No voice called out. The queen did not rise. The court did not shift. Everyone simply watched. Lyra passed her mother without acknowledgement, without a glance, without the slightest indication that she was aware the most powerful person in the kingdom was sitting 3 steps to her left. Bold strategy, diplomatically speaking. She crossed the remaining distance in small, steady, unhurried steps and stopped directly in front of Theron. Up close, her expression was even more unreadable. Not cold, not curious, not hostile, just quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a space instead of emptying it. Theron's first instinct, the one that existed before training, before protocols, before everything complicated, was simple. Be gentle. "Hello," he said softly. She did not respond. He offered a small, careful smile. "I'm Theron. She stepped closer. He blinked. And then, without hesitation, without warning, without any of the thousand social cues that normally precede physical contact between two strangers, Lyra reached up, grabbed the front of his coat, and climbed into his lap. Theron froze. Completely. Absolutely. Impressively. Every possible reaction his body could have chosen, every instinct, every reflex, every trained response, decided, in a rare moment of unanimous agreement, to do nothing at all. She settled against him with the ease of someone who had made this decision long before entering the room, long before today, maybe long before he ever set foot on this world. Her small head rested against his chest. Her fingers gripped the fabric of his jacket, tight, determined, like she had found something she was not willing to let go of. And then, within seconds, her breathing slowed. She fell asleep. The entire chamber held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Somewhere in the vast room, a device emitted a soft, uncertain hum, as if even the technology wasn't sure what it was supposed to do next. Theron stared straight ahead. His arms froze in midair in a position that communicated maximum confusion and minimum competence. Okay, think. A child just climbed into your lap in front of the queen and the entire royal court. A child who apparently hasn't touched anyone in years just grabbed your coat like it was a lifeline. And now she's asleep, and everyone is staring at you, and you have no idea what to do, so you're going to do the only thing you can do, which is nothing. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm going to assume this is not standard protocol." He glanced, very slowly, very carefully, toward Queen Rivara. She was no longer seated. At some point, he had no idea when, she had risen from her throne. She stood a few steps closer now, her gaze fixed not on him, but on the child, on the small sleeping figure resting peacefully against a stranger's chest. And her expression, not anger, not shock, something that had been locked away for a very long time, pressing against the inside of her composure, trying to get out. "She has not done this," Rivara said softly, "since before the war." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Theron looked down at Lyra, at her closed eyes, at her small hands gripping his jacket, at the way her breathing had settled into something slow and even and trusting. Then he looked back up at the Queen. "Right," he said. "Of course, that would have been useful information about 5 minutes ago." No one corrected him. No one moved. The guards remained perfectly still, though Theron noticed their hands were no longer relaxed. The court stood frozen in a way that felt less like discipline and more like uncertainty. Like everyone had been trained for every scenario except this one. And here it was. Theron exhaled slowly, very carefully, making sure the breath didn't disturb the small sleeping presence against him. Because here was the thing his brain was trying very hard not to process. The thing that had nothing to do with diplomacy or protocol or ancient alien monarchies. She felt familiar. Not her face, not her voice, not anything he could name or categorize or explain. But the weight of her, the way she curled against him, the way her fingers held on, tight but not desperate, certain but not demanding, like she belonged there. And that cracked something open inside him, something he had spent years sealing shut, something he had buried under layers of work and travel and the careful construction of a life that never required him to be still long enough to feel anything. Because stillness was dangerous. Stillness was where the memories lived, and the memories had teeth. He had held a child like this before. Different child, different world, different lifetime. A small girl with brown eyes and a laugh that sounded like bells. His daughter, 3 years old, falling asleep in his arms on a Tuesday afternoon while rain hit the windows and the world outside was just noise. She died 11 months later, and he had never held anyone like that again. Until now. His jaw tightened, just for a second. Then he released it, controlled, practiced, the way someone does when they have spent years learning how to carry grief without letting it show. "So," he said, quieter now, steadier than he felt. "What would you like me to do?" Ravara did not answer immediately. Her eyes met his for the first time since Lyra had crossed the room, and there was no hostility there, no accusation, only a question, and perhaps the beginning of something else. "Do not move," she said. Theron gave a small nod. "That," he replied, "I can definitely manage." Time stretched in a way Theron had never experienced before. Not slow, not fast, suspended, like the moment itself refused to resolve, refused to become a memory, insisted on remaining exactly where it was. He stayed exactly where he was, one arm carefully supporting Lyra, the other resting awkwardly at his side, purposeless, confused about its role in this situation. A device drifted closer to his shoulder, thin, elegant, emitting a low, curious tone, like a mechanical cat deciding whether to trust him. "Is that going to do anything unpleasant?" he said. "Or are we just getting acquainted?" "It will scan you." The voice belonged to a scientist, tall, angular features, eyes that moved faster than their body. Theron would later learn their name was Senem. "Of course it will," Theron muttered. "Why wouldn't it?" A thin layer of light passed over him, barely noticeable, like a cool breeze made visible. The device pulsed, processing information at a speed that suggested it was either extremely efficient or deeply judgmental. Probably both. "Genetic markers detected," Sene said. Their voice sharpened, tightened. "Unusual. Highly unusual." "I get that a lot," Theron said. Sen did not seem to hear him. They were already expanding a projection in the air. Complex patterns unfolded, spiraling strands of data, shifting symbols that rewrote themselves as they were observed. Beautiful, and completely incomprehensible to anyone without several centuries of advanced genetic education. "These markers," Sene said, pointing to a cluster of glowing sequences, "they align with an extinct genetic framework, one that belonged to the original royal lineage." Ravara's posture changed, subtle, but unmistakable. The shift of someone hearing something they had believed impossible. "That lineage is gone," she said. "So we believed," Senna replied. but fragments appear to have persisted, scattered, diluted, nearly erased. A pause. Until now. Theron looked between them. I feel like I should be concerned, he said, that I'm being described as a historical anomaly. You are being described, Rivara said, as something we do not yet understand. Ah, he nodded slightly. That's somehow worse. Sane continued working. The projection deepened, layers peeled back, revealing something underneath the genetic data that made Sane stop mid-gesture. These markers, they said slowly, they are not natural mutations. Rivera stepped forward. Explain. The genetic fragments in his system, they bear signs of direct intervention. Someone placed them there, deliberately. Senna looked up, their expression caught between fascination and unease. Based on our initial analysis, the intervention appears to be several generations old, but the integration pattern is unusual. I will need more time to be certain. This is not evolution, Rivara said. No, Senna confirmed. This is design. The room changed. Not physically, emotionally. The quality of silence went from uncertain to charged. Every figure in the chamber recalculated, reassessed. What had been a confusing anomaly was now a mystery, and not a comfortable one. Theron glanced down at Lyra, still sleeping, still holding on, still breathing in that slow, even, trusting rhythm that made his chest ache in ways he was not prepared to examine. Okay, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Definitely not a coincidence. They moved him eventually. Not far, not fast, not without extensive debate conducted entirely in meaningful glances and subtle ear movements that Theron could not interpret but absolutely understood on a primal level. They're arguing about me, without words. That's either very impressive or very terrifying. The transition was delicate. 3 attendants approached with a floating platform that adjusted its shape continuously, anticipating needs before they were expressed, like a very anxious piece of furniture. That looks expensive, Theron said. It is adaptive, Senna replied. Not what I asked. They moved slowly, so slowly that Theron became aware of individual seconds passing like small, polite footsteps. The platform rose to meet him. The floor adjusted beneath. Everything around Lyra moved without disturbing her, without even making her eyelids flicker. They passed through corridors that unfolded like living things. Walls curved aside, pathways illuminated, structures reshaped to allow passage, the palace responding to them. Or more specifically, responding to the sleeping child. Does the building always do this? Theron asked. Or is it just showing off? It responds to necessity, Rivara replied. So yes, showing off. The faintest pause, then, a small breath from the queen, not a laugh, not even close, but the ghost of one, the shadow of something that might have been amusement. Once, in a different life, when things were easier. They entered a smaller chamber, warmer light, softer surfaces, less formal. This is her space, Rivara said. Theron looked around. The room was filled with objects, soft structures, faintly glowing patterns, small constructs designed for play, for interaction, for a child. But none of them were being used. Everything was pristine, untouched, waiting. Feels like it's been waiting, he said. Rivara did not respond immediately. It has, she said. The platform lowered. Theron settled into a more stable position. Lyra remained against him, undisturbed, and for the first time since entering the palace. The tension eased, not completely, but enough. Enough to breathe without calculating the consequences. Sene moved to a corner of the room, setting up monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency. The floating interface displayed Lyra's neural patterns in real time. Gentle waves, consistent rhythms. The connection remains stable, Sene said. Stronger in this environment. Theron nodded, then looked at Rivara, really looked at her. Not as the queen, not as the most powerful person in the room, but as the woman standing at the edge of her daughter's space, watching a stranger hold the child she could not reach. How long? He asked quietly. since she connected with anyone. Ravara's eyes shifted. Something carefully restrained moved behind them. Years, she said. And now she walks past an entire royal court, ignores everyone, and decides I'm acceptable. That is correct. Theron considered that. I would like to officially state that I did nothing to earn this. No, Ravara said. You did not. Another pause, longer, heavier. And then Theron said something he had not planned to say. Something that came from a place he normally kept locked. The last time a child fell asleep on me like this, it was my daughter. The room went still. Ravara's gaze sharpened, not with suspicion, with attention. She was 3, Theron continued, voice steady, careful. The way you speak when you're walking across ice and you know exactly how thin it is. She liked to grab my jacket, same spot, right here. He glanced down at Lyra's fingers, curled into the exact place. She died when she was 4. Silence. Not the diplomatic kind, not the uncertain kind. The kind that happens when someone says something true, and the truth is so heavy that the air itself has to make room for it. Ravara studied him for a long time, longer than was comfortable, longer than protocol allowed. But protocol had left the building somewhere around the time a princess climbed into a stranger's lap. So, is that why you stay still? She asked. Not because I told you to. Theron met her gaze. I stay still, he said, because last time, I wasn't there when it mattered, and I've spent every day since then wishing I had been. He expected the queen to pull back, to retreat behind formality, to remember that he was a stranger, a human, an outsider with no claim to her daughter's trust. She didn't. Instead, a door opened in her expression, just a crack, just enough to let light through. Then you understand, she said, why this cannot fail. Theron looked down at Lyra. Yeah, he said, I understand. The night came, or what passed for night in a palace where the architecture decided its own lighting schedule. Lyra had been transferred to her sleeping area, still within the room, still close to Theron. The monitors confirmed what everyone already sensed. Distance disrupted her. Proximity stabilized her. The math was simple. The implications were not. Theron sat in a chair that had materialized from the floor. Because of course it had. Watching the slow pulse of light from the monitoring devices. Listening to Lyra breathe. He was tired, deeply, completely. The kind of tiredness that lives in your bones and your memories simultaneously. And then, footsteps. Not from the corridor, from the shadows near the entrance, where a tall figure had been standing so still that Theron had assumed they were part of the wall. Kael, head of the royal guard, built like a wall that had decided to become a person. Face that suggested he had never smiled and considered the concept suspicious. Eyes that missed nothing. He moved to stand beside Theron, said nothing for several seconds, just stood there, looking at Lyra. Then, your file, Kael said. His voice was low, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from a lifetime of standing in rooms where important things happened and knowing that the most dangerous thing you could do was be overheard. Theron glanced at him. What about it? It was inserted into the ambassador registry 4 months ago. Before that, it did not exist. The words took a moment to land. Someone put me on the list, Theron said. Yes? Someone wanted me here. Yes. Do you know who? No. Kael's jaw tightened. But I know it was not the queen. Theron sat with that. Let it settle. Let the shape of it form in his mind. Someone, unknown, had placed him here, had orchestrated this meeting, had arranged for a man carrying extinct royal genetic markers to walk into the throne room of a queen whose daughter was dying. That was not luck. That was a plan. Why are you telling me this? Theron asked. Kael did not look at him. His eyes remained on Lyra, and for just a moment, a fraction of a second, something crossed his face that looked very much like grief. Because the last person who connected with her like that, he said, was the king. Theron's chest tightened. And the king. Kale continued, voice flat, controlled. The voice of a man who had carried a secret for years and was only now releasing the smallest piece of it. Did not die in battle. The room was very quiet. Very, very quiet. The king was murdered, Kale said, because of that connection. Theron did not move, did not blink, did not breathe for what felt like a very long time. Then, by who? Kyle finally looked at him, and in that look, Theron saw something he recognized, the same thing he saw in his own mirror every morning. A man who had failed to protect someone he loved, and was trying, desperately, not to let it happen again. I don't know yet, Kale said, but they are still here, in the palace, on the council. He turned towards the door, paused. Guard her, he said. I could not guard him. Guard her. And then he was gone. Theron sat alone in the soft light, listening to Lyra breathe, feeling the weight of what had just been said pressing down on him like a second gravity. Someone had murdered the king because of this connection, and now Theron had the same connection. And someone, the same someone, was still in the palace. He looked at Lyra, small, sleeping, trusting him completely, holding his jacket like it was the only safe thing in a world that had taken everything from her. Okay, he whispered. I'm staying. Not because the queen asked, not because of gene markers or ancient systems or political obligations. Because once, he wasn't there, and a little girl died, and he would burn this entire palace to the ground before he let that happen again. Morning came quietly, the way it does in places where the walls decide when it's time to wake up. Theron had not slept. He sat in the same chair, in the same position, watching the same monitors, running the same thoughts in circles until they wore grooves into his brain. Someone put me here. Someone killed the king. Someone is still here. And between those thoughts, always, constantly, the steady sound of Lyra breathing. Ravara entered without announcement. She looked at him, at the shadows under his eyes, at the way he sat, still, watchful, the posture of someone who had been standing guard without standing up. She knew. She didn't ask what he'd been doing all night. She didn't need to. Instead, she moved to Lyra's side, stood there, looking down at her daughter, and for one unguarded moment, just one, Ravara looked like exactly what she was, a mother, terrified, exhausted, carrying a grief so large it had reshaped her into someone harder just to survive the weight of it. She looks peaceful, Ravara said. She is, Theron replied. She has not looked peaceful in years. I know, Ravara turned to face him. There is something you should understand about what is happening, about what she carries. She sat, not on a throne, not on an elevated surface, on the edge of Lyra's sleeping platform, close like a mother sitting on the edge of her child's bed, waiting for the right words. The soul resonance, she began, is not a metaphor. It is a biological system, ancient, fundamental to our earliest ancestors. It allows a bond, deep, reciprocal, a connection that operates below consciousness, below thought, below everything we typically understand as communication. Theron listened, carefully. For most of our people, it is dormant, a relic, like an organ that evolved past its function. Ravara paused. But the royal line carried an active variant. The king had it. Lyra inherited it. And when the king died, Theron said, the connection severed. Ravara's voice thinned, just slightly, like a wire pulled too tight. Not gently, not gradually. It tore, like losing a limb, except the limb was inside her mind. Theron closed his eyes for a second. I knew what that felt like. Not the same way, not through some ancient biological system, but through the ordinary, human, devastating mechanism of losing someone so fundamental that your brain cannot accept the empty space they left behind. She stopped speaking after that. Ravara continued. Stopped touching, stopped allowing anyone close. The resonance, without a tether, without a matching signal, began to destabilize, turn inward. She looked at Lyra. It is consuming her, slowly, from the inside. How long does she have? The question was direct, blunt, the kind of question that polite people avoid and honest people ask. Ravara met his eyes. Months, perhaps less. The word landed like a fist. And I'm what? Theron said carefully. A matching signal. Your genetic markers, the ancient fragments, they resonate at a frequency compatible with hers. When she is near you, the system stabilizes. Her neural patterns calm. The deterioration slows. Slows, Theron repeated. Not stops. We do not yet know if it can stop. He sat with that. A child he'd met 12 hours ago was dying, and his presence, his existence, was the only thing slowing it down. He looked at Lyra, still sleeping, still holding on, and somewhere inside him, in the place where his daughter used to live, where her memory sat like a permanent ache that he had learned to carry but never put down, something made room, like a house that had been empty for years and suddenly felt a hand on the door. I'll stay, he said. Ravara's expression did not change, but her ears tilted forward, just slightly, the first unguarded movement he had seen from her. You understand what that means, she said. It means I sit in this chair until we figure out how to save her. It means more than that. I know. He looked at the queen. But let's start with the chair and work our way up. Ravara studied him for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found, she seemed to accept it. Very well, she said. And then, because the universe apparently had a sense of timing, Lyra stirred, not dramatically, a small movement, fingers loosening, then tightening again, confirming something was still there. Her eyes opened slowly, carefully, like someone waking up in a place they were not sure would still be safe. She looked at Theron, directly, steadily, with an expression that didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like confirmation. Hi, he said softly. She blinked once, studied his face, then shifted, not away, closer. She pressed her forehead against his chest again, testing whether the feeling from before was still real. It was. Still me, Theron whispered. Nothing's changed. I promise I didn't turn into a different person while you were sleeping. A long pause. Then, very slowly, Lyra turned her head, just slightly, just enough to see past Theron's shoulder, to where Ravara sat, still, watching, barely breathing. Their eyes met, mother and daughter, for the first time in years. Lyra did not reach for her, not yet, but she looked. She held that gaze for 3 full seconds, which doesn't sound like much, until you understand that 3 seconds of eye contact from a child who hasn't acknowledged anyone in years is not a moment. It is a door opening. Ravara's breath caught, quiet, almost imperceptible. But Theron heard it, and he understood exactly what it meant, because he had felt that same catch in his own throat. Years ago, when his daughter said his name for the first time, the sound of someone receiving something they thought they'd lost forever. She sees you, Theron said gently. Ravara's eyes moved to him, bright, controlled, but only barely. And yet she does not come to me, she said. Not yet, Theron replied, but she looked, and that matters. Ravara held his gaze, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not romance, not attraction, something deeper and more practical than either. An understanding between two people who had both lost a child, in different ways, at different times, and were now sitting on either side of a little girl who might still be saved. If they got this right, if they didn't fail again. The morning light grew warmer, golden, the palace adjusting its mood to match the room, and Theron sat there, holding a child who was not his daughter, in a world that was not his home, knowing that somewhere in this palace, someone wanted this connection destroyed, and knowing, with absolute certainty, that he was not going to let that happen. Not this time. Part 2. The Cost of Connection. The first memory came without warning. Theron was sitting in the chair, the same chair, which had become less of a chair and more of a permanent address at this point. Lyra was awake, barely, hovering in that soft space between sleep and consciousness where children sometimes live for hours. Content, unhurried, her fingers still curled into his jacket. And then, a flash, not in the room, in his head, behind his eyes, inside his skull where no flash had any business being. A battlefield. Smoke. Thick. Acrid. The kind that doesn't just block your vision, it replaces the air entirely. Forces itself into your lungs like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. Theron gasped, because he wasn't just seeing it. He was there, standing in it, feeling the heat, hearing the sound. A low, continuous roar, like the world itself was screaming. And then, a voice. Deep, warm, familiar in a way that made no sense. Because Theron had never heard this voice before, not once, not ever. And yet his chest recognized it before his brain did. The way your body sometimes remembers a song before you recall the words. The voice said, "Hold the line," and then, gone. Theron blinked. The room snapped back into focus. Lyra's room, soft light, warm surfaces, monitoring equipment humming its quiet mechanical lullaby. I was breathing hard, too hard for someone who had been sitting still. His hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough to notice. What the hell? He looked down at Lyra. She was watching him, her eyes open, clear, focused, like she had seen exactly what he had seen, and was not surprised. "You okay?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly. "He sang," she said. Two words, soft, almost nothing, but they hit Theron like a truck, because the voice in the memory, the deep, warm voice on the battlefield, had been singing just before the smoke closed in, just before everything went sideways. A low, steady melody, calm in the middle of chaos, the kind of song someone sings to make the people around them feel brave. The king. That was the king's voice. And somehow, through whatever impossible biological bridge existed between this child and this man, the king's memories were leaking through. Sen confirmed it within the hour. The projection filled the room, neural pathways mapped in glowing threads. Two systems, Theron's and Lyra's, overlapping, intersecting, exchanging information in patterns that Sen had never seen before, that no one had seen before, because this wasn't supposed to be possible. The soul resonance, Senna said, speaking carefully. The way someone speaks when they are describing something that violates everything they thought they knew, is acting as a conduit. The princess's stored memories, specifically those connected to intense emotional experiences, are transferring to you. Transferring, Theron repeated. Yes, as in putting themselves inside my head. That is a simplified but essentially accurate description. Great, Theron rubbed his temple. Just what I needed, more things in my head. Sene adjusted the projection, highlighted a particular cluster of neural activity. These are the king's memories, stored in Lyra's subconscious since birth, part of the resonance bond she shared with her father. When he died, the memories didn't disappear. They became trapped, locked inside her with no outlet. Until me. Until you, Sene confirmed. Your compatible frequency is giving the system somewhere to send them. Think of it as... They paused, searching for a metaphor. Pressure release. So I'm a valve. You are a compatible receptor for encrypted emotional data transmitted through an ancient biological network that we believe to be extinct. Valve is shorter. Senna stared at him. Then, despite themselves, yes, you are a valve. Ravara stood near the entrance, listening, her face giving away nothing, but her ears, those long expressive ears that seemed to communicate everything her face would not. They were pressed slightly forward, alert, hungry for information. Will it harm him? She asked. Sene hesitated, which was not reassuring. The transfers are intensifying, they said. Each one is stronger than the last, more vivid, more immersive. If the pattern continues, he may begin experiencing difficulty distinguishing the king's memories from his own. Theron processed that. So I could lose track of which memories are mine, he said. Theoretically. Theoretically is a word scientists use when they mean probably but don't want to get blamed for it. Senna did not argue, which told Theron everything he needed to know. He looked at Lyra. She was sitting on the floor now, close to him, always close, but awake, present, more present than she'd been since he arrived. Her eyes tracked movement, her head turned towards sounds. She was re-engaging with the world, slowly, carefully, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. And she was watching her mother. Not directly, not obviously, but Theron noticed. The way Lyra's gaze drifted toward Rivara every few minutes, checking, confirming, making sure she was still there. The way a child does when they're not ready to go to someone, but desperately need to know they haven't left. Rivara noticed too. He could tell by the way she positioned herself. Always visible, never too close, never too far. A careful distance that said, I am here. I will not push. I will wait. And Theron sat between them. Literally, physically. A human bridge between a mother who couldn't reach her child and a child who couldn't reach her mother. Which was, when he thought about it, exactly what he'd said he would be. Temporary bridge. He just hadn't expected it to hurt this much. The second memory came that afternoon. This one was different, gentler, not a battlefield, a garden. Theron saw it as clearly as if he were standing in it. Tall plants with leaves that shimmered silver in light. A pathway made of something that looked like glass but felt like grass. And sounds, everywhere. The kind of alive buzzing that told you the world was working properly, that things were growing, that nothing was broken yet. And there, in the center, a man, tall, strong in the quiet way, not muscular, just solid. The kind of person who made you feel like the ground was more stable when they stood on it. Long ears, sharp features softened by an expression that didn't belong on the face of a king. He was smiling, because in his arms, laughing, reaching for the shimmering leaves, was a very small child. Lyra, before the war, before the silence, before everything that turned her into the ghost who walked through throne rooms without seeing anyone. She was laughing, and the king was singing, the same melody from the battlefield. But here it wasn't brave, it wasn't defiant, it was just happy. The sound a father makes when the world hasn't broken yet, and his daughter thinks silver leaves are the most amazing thing in the universe. Theron felt tears on his face before he realized he was crying. Not the king's tears, his own, because he knew this feeling, the weight of a child in your arms, the sound of laughter that belongs only to you, the absolute certainty that you would burn everything to keep this one small person safe. He had known it, once, and then he had lost it, and now it was being handed back to him in fragments, through the mind of someone else's daughter, carrying the love of someone else's father, and it was the most painful gift he had ever received. The memory faded. Theron opened his eyes. Lyra was looking at him, directly, knowingly. He sang, she said again. Yeah. Theron's voice was rough, unsteady. Yeah, he did. She moved closer, pressed against his side with that same certain weight. And this time, very slowly, very carefully, her other hand extended outward, toward Rivera. Not a reach, not yet, more like a direction, an indication. A finger pointed at a possibility that hadn't existed an hour ago. Rivera saw it. She went completely still. This was the thing she had been waiting for since her daughter disappeared behind walls of silence, since the war took her husband and the grief took her child, and she was left ruling a kingdom with steady hands and a shattered heart. Theron looked at the queen, at the controlled mask she wore, at the way her hands trembled, just slightly, just at the edges, where she thought no one could see. She's reaching, he said quietly. Not all the way, but more than before. Ravara's eyes found his, bright, fierce, not with anger, with something far more dangerous. Hope. How do you know, she asked. Because that's what it looks like, he said, when someone is finding their way back. The council did not find any of this acceptable. Theron learned this the following morning, when Sene arrived looking like someone who had been awake for 30 hours, which they had, and carrying data that they spread across the room's projection system with the urgency of someone delivering very bad news disguised as science. The council has been monitoring the resonance output, Sene said, remotely, without the Queen's authorization. Theron raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a problem. It is, Sene confirmed, but it is not the primary problem. There's a hierarchy of problems. Wonderful. The primary problem, Sene continued, is that the Council's senior strategic advisor has formally requested your separation from the princess. For study. Study, Theron repeated. As in, taking me apart. As in, controlled examination in a secure environment. That's a very polite way to describe something very unpleasant. Yes, Sene agreed. It is. Theron looked at them. Who's the senior strategic advisor? General Drek. The name landed with precision, like a single note played in an empty room. Clear. Undeniable. Tell me about Drek, he said. Sene hesitated, glanced toward the door, lowered their voice. General Drek served alongside the king during the war. They were close, very close. Some say closer than any advisor had been to a monarch in generations. Were, Sene confirmed. After the king's death, Drek changed, became harder, more convinced that the old systems, the resonance, the bonds, were weaknesses, vulnerabilities that had to be eliminated for the kingdom's survival. Theron sat with that, a man who lost his closest friend, who decided the thing that connected them was the thing that killed him, and now wanted to destroy every trace of it, including the little girl carrying it, including the stranger who'd just become its anchor. He's afraid, Theron said. Sene blinked. That is not the word most people would use. Most people haven't lost someone and then spent years trying to make sure it doesn't happen again by controlling everything around them. Sene stared at him for a moment, then nodded. Once, slowly, like someone recognizing a truth they hadn't expected from this particular source. The council session was not optional. Ravara explained this with the careful tone of someone delivering information they know will not be received well. Drek has invoked his right to a formal security assessment, she said. I cannot override it without appearing to compromise the kingdom's safety. Can't or won't, Theron asked. Her gaze sharpened. Cannot. There is a difference. My authority is absolute in matters of state, but matters of royal security fall under shared jurisdiction with the council. By design, to prevent any single ruler from placing personal interests above the kingdom. That's very reasonable in theory. Yes. And very inconvenient right now. Yes. Theron looked at Lyra. She was building something on the floor, using the soft constructs from her room, stacking them carefully, methodically, with a focus that suggested she was not playing. She was constructing. Something with purpose. Something with meaning she hadn't shared. He'd been with her for 2 days now. 2 days of sitting, holding, waiting, watching this child slowly, painfully, begin to resurface from whatever dark water she had been drowning in for years. 2 days, and already the thought of being separated from her made his chest tight in a way he recognized. Careful, don't do this. Don't make her your daughter. She's not your daughter. But his heart, which had always been significantly less rational than his brain, was not listening. What happens if the council votes to separate us? He asked. Ravara did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. Then what? Theron pressed. Then I make a choice, she said, one that I may not be able to take back. The chamber was massive, because of course it was. Theron walked in with Lyra holding his wrist and Ravara walking beside them. Not ahead, not behind, beside. The positioning was deliberate. Everything the queen did was deliberate. But this particular deliberation was not for the council's benefit. It was for Lyra's. The council sat in ascending tiers, dozens of them, arranged in a semicircle that felt less like governance and more like a tribunal, faces controlled, eyes sharp, the kind of room where decisions were made with mathematics instead of mercy. And at the center, elevated slightly above the others, sat General Drek. Theron studied him, took his time about it. Drek was not what he expected. Not a villain, not a monster, an older man, weathered, with the kind of face that had once been kind and had been reshaped by years into something harder, more angular, like a stone that the river had worn into a blade. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply, profoundly tired. This is a man who hasn't slept properly in years, who carries something heavy and calls it duty because naming it grief would make it real. Theron recognized that too. The human will submit to examination, Drek said. Not a question, a statement of fact, delivered with the confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome. The human has a name, Theron replied, and he's standing right here. Drek's gaze measured him, not the body, the intent. Your name is irrelevant, Drek said. What matters is what you carry. What I carry, Theron repeated, is a child who chose to trust me. That's not a security risk. That's a miracle you're too afraid to recognize. The chamber went quiet, not the polite kind, the dangerous kind. Drek's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes reinforced itself, like a wall being made thicker from the inside. The resonance is not a miracle, he said. It is a weapon. It destroyed the king. It is destroying the princess. And if we allow it to spread unchecked to an outsider, it will destroy everything we have left. The resonance didn't kill the king, Theron said. He hadn't planned to say it, hadn't rehearsed it, hadn't even fully formed the thought before it left his mouth. But there it was, hanging in the air, and the moment it landed, he saw it. Drek flinched. Tiny, almost invisible, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second. But Theron caught it, because he had been watching, because Kyle's warning had made him watch. Because when someone tells you the killer is in the room, you start paying attention to the things people try to hide. Ravara stepped forward. This assessment is about the princess's welfare, not historical debate. It is about security, Drek replied, recovering, smooth again. The bond between this human and the princess creates vulnerability, dependency. If he is removed or compromised, the princess destabilizes. That makes him a single point of failure, and single points of failure are unacceptable. He's not wrong. That was the uncomfortable part. Strategically, militarily, he was making a rational argument, the kind that sounds right in a briefing room, the kind that treats people as systems and feelings as flaws. I propose temporary separation, Drek continued, controlled, monitored, to assess the princess's capacity for independent stabilization. She doesn't have independent stabilization, Sane said from the lower tier. That's the entire point. The resonance requires a tether. Without one, she deteriorates. Then we find an alternative tether, Drek said, one that doesn't involve an unvetted alien with unknown genetic modifications sitting inside the royal palace. Theron felt Lyra's hand tighten on his wrist. Not dramatically, not urgently. The way a child holds on when they sense something is about to go wrong. The instinct that exists before language, before understanding, before everything except the bone-deep knowledge that the world is about to take something away. She's listening, Theron said quietly. Not to Drek, to the room. She's standing right here, and she is listening to you discuss separating her from the only person she's allowed to touch in years. Like she's a system to be optimized. Silence. She is not a system, he continued. She's a child, and I don't care what your protocols say, or your security assessments, or your strategic analysis. You do not take a child away from the thing that makes her feel safe and call it protection. Drek's jaw tightened. Sentiment is not strategy. No, Theron agreed. It's not. It's better. The council voted. It wasn't close. Drek's influence ran deep. His arguments were logical, measured, professional. The kind of arguments that win votes in rooms where people are afraid and looking for someone to tell them what to do. 12 to 5, in favor of separation. Ravara stood motionless as the result was announced. Her face, that perfect controlled royal mask, did not crack, did not give a single centimeter. But her hands, hidden beneath the formal drape of her garments, were shaking. The separation will be temporary, Drek said. Monitored at all times. The princess will be kept in a stabilization unit under direct observation. A stabilization unit, Theron said flatly. You mean isolation. I mean safety. You mean a cage. The decision has been made. Guards approached, respectful, professional, doing their jobs, doing exactly what they had been told to do by a system that valued procedure over people. Lyra felt them coming before she saw them. Her grip on Theron's wrist tightened, both hands now, holding on with everything her small body could manage. She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes weren't quiet. They were afraid. Stay, she said. One word, the same word she'd been saying since the beginning. But this time it wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't the sleepy request of a child settling into safety. It was desperate. I'm not going anywhere, Theron said, keeping his voice steady. The way you do when everything inside you is screaming, and you need to be calm for someone who needs you more than you need to fall apart. The human will comply, Drek said. The human, Theron replied, would like to point out that he is holding a child who is currently experiencing visible distress, and anyone who touches her right now is going to make things significantly worse. But the guards were already moving. One reached for Lyra, gently, professionally. Her hand left Theron's wrist, and everything went wrong. It started small. A vibration, low, almost below hearing. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. The floor beneath Lyra's feet flickered. Not the polite glow that followed footsteps. Something erratic, fractured, like a heartbeat skipping. Then the walls, the breathing walls, the alive walls that curved and adjusted and responded to the palace's moods. They shuddered, spasmodically, like something was interfering with the signal that kept them functional. Sen looked at their monitoring device, then looked up sharply. Her readings are spiking. Theron was already trying to move back toward Lyra, but the guards had positioned themselves between them, following orders, doing their jobs, not understanding that their jobs were about to become irrelevant. Kale stood near the far wall. He had not moved during the vote, had not spoken, had watched the entire proceeding with the expression of a man watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. A man who had seen this before, who recognized the shape of it. The moment when well-intentioned people make a decision that sounds correct and feels catastrophic. He had seen it the night the king died. He had stood in a corridor and hesitated 1 second too long, and that second had cost him everything. Not again. As the guards blocked Theron, as Lyra's readings climbed, as Sene's voice rose with professional alarm, Kael made a decision, the kind of decision that takes a lifetime of regret to produce. The kind that is not brave so much as inevitable. He stepped aside, not forward, not backward, aside, clearing the path between Theron and the child. A subtle movement, one that could be explained as repositioning. But Theron saw it and understood it. Go. Lyra stood alone, not alone in the room, alone in the way that matters, surrounded by people, but connected to no one. Her hands dropped to her sides, her eyes, wide, unfocused, looking at everything and nothing, exactly like the flash forward, exactly like the image that had haunted the beginning of this story. The child in the center of destruction, not causing it out of rage, causing it out of pain. Because that was the thing about Lyra's power. The thing that Drek and the council and their strategic assessments hadn't understood. Hadn't wanted to understand. The energy wasn't a weapon pointed outward. It was a wound pointed inward. She wasn't attacking, she was collapsing. The resonance, without its tether, without Theron's matching frequency, did exactly what Rivara had described. It turned on its host. It began dismantling her from the inside out, not with fire, not with force, with absence, with the cellular certainty that the connection was gone and therefore nothing was worth maintaining. The child was letting go, not of the room, not of the people, of herself. The energy pulsed outward as a side effect, the way heat radiates from a fever, the way sound escapes from a scream pressed behind closed lips. The palace absorbed what it could. The walls cracked where it couldn't. Theron fought past the guards. He didn't push them. He moved through gaps, around obstacles, through the path KL had opened, with the kind of focused determination that has nothing to do with strength and everything to do with not being able to live with yourself if you stop. But the energy kept building, and the closer he got, the harder it pushed back. Not because Lyra was trying to keep him away, because she had forgotten he was there. That was the worst part. She wasn't rejecting him. She had simply, in the space of 30 seconds, the ability to sense his presence. The resonance had collapsed so quickly that her system had reverted to its default state, which was grief, which was isolation, which was a child sitting at the bottom of an ocean of pain with no memory that the surface existed. Lyra, he called, firm, clear, not shouting. Lyra, I'm here. Nothing. The chamber shook, tiles cracked, a structural support groaned. Somewhere deep in the palace, something ancient and fundamental broke. This was the moment, the one from the beginning, the flash forward that had started everything. A child in the center, a queen who cannot reach her, a man on the ground. Except Theron wasn't on the ground yet. He pushed forward, one step, then another, each one harder than the last, the energy pressing against him like walking into a hurricane made of grief. His body protested, his vision blurred. Something warm ran from his nose. Blood. Probably. He didn't check. Didn't matter. 3 more steps. 2. 1. His hand closed around hers. And everything, stopped. Not gradually, not softly, like a switch being thrown, like a scream being answered, like a child drowning who suddenly feels someone grab their arm. Lyra blinked, her eyes refocused, found his face, registered, recognized. Stay, she whispered. I'm here, he said. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. I'm right here. She crumbled into him, not gracefully, not gently, the way someone collapses when they have been holding themselves together through sheer force of will, and the will finally gives out. Her small body pressed against his, shaking, her hands gripping his jacket so hard the fabric strained. And she cried, for the first time since her father died. Lyra cried, not silently, not politely, the way children cry when they finally feel safe enough to let go. Messy, raw, unbearable to hear, because every sound she made was a sound she should have made years ago, and hadn't, because there was no one to make it to. Theron held her, the way he'd held his daughter, and for a moment, just one, he let himself feel it all. The girl he lost, the girl he was holding, the grief that connected them. Not the same grief, but the same shape, the same weight, the same desperate question underneath it all. Please don't leave. He pressed his chin against the top of her head, closed his eyes, and held on. Not because anyone told him to, not because the resonance required it, but because this was the thing he knew how to do, the only thing he had ever been truly good at, being still when someone needed him to stay. He had learned it too late for his own daughter, but not too late for this one. The chamber was silent, not because the crisis had passed. It hadn't. The walls were still cracked, the floor still flickered, structural damage echoed through the palace like aftershocks. But the people, the council, the guards, every single person in that room who had voted for separation 12 minutes ago was absolutely, completely silent. because they had just watched a child nearly destroy herself, and they had watched a man walk through her pain to reach her, and neither of those things could be reduced to a strategic assessment. Drek stood at his position. His face, that hard-weathered mask, had not changed, but his hands, Theron noticed, were trembling, and not from the structural vibrations. Rivara moved. Not slowly, not carefully, not with the measured diplomatic precision that had defined her every action since this began. She moved like a mother, fast, desperate, crossing the damaged floor in strides that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with the primal need to reach her child. She reached them, knelt, her robes pooling on the cracked floor, her hands hovering just above Lyra's back, not touching, not yet, still asking permission, even now, even after everything, still respecting the invisible wall her daughter had built. "Lyra," she said, her voice cracked, for the first time, in front of the council, in front of the guards, in front of everyone. Queen Rivara's voice cracked. "Lyra, I am here." Lyra did not look up immediately, but she shifted, just slightly, just enough that her body was no longer curled entirely into Theron, just enough that there was space, an opening. Rivara's hand lowered, touched her daughter's shoulder. Lyra flinched. Rivara froze, and then, slowly, so slowly that Theron could count the seconds, Lyra's hand moved from his jacket, reached backward, found her mother's fingers. Contact. Rivara inhaled sharply, a sound so small and so enormous at the same time, the sound of years of distance collapsing into a single point of touch. "I lost my husband to war," Rivara said. Not to Theron, not to the council, to the room, to the record, to the universe that had taken everything from her and was now watching to see what she would do. Her voice was steady again, but different, not controlled, real. "I will not lose my daughter to procedure." She looked at the council, at Drek, at every face that had raised a hand in favor of separation. "This is not a security matter," she said. "This is my child, and I am choosing her, over your vote, over your protocols, over your fear." "You are overriding the council," Drek said. Quiet, measured, but underneath it, something frayed. "I am being her mother," Rivara replied. "Something I should have done long before today." The words settled. Heavy, final. The kind of words that rearrange the shape of a room, of a government, of a relationship between a ruler and the people who serve her. No one challenged her, not because they agreed, some of them didn't, but because the woman kneeling on a cracked floor holding her daughter's hand was not someone you argued with. Not in that moment. Theron exhaled slowly. His nose was still bleeding. His head was pounding. The memories from the king were swirling around inside his skull like leaves in a storm. And a very small girl was still holding his jacket with one hand and her mother's fingers with the other, connecting them. A bridge. "Okay," he murmured. "We're okay." Lyra's breathing steadied. Her grip on both of them equalized. Same pressure, same need, not choosing, holding. And in that moment, something locked into place. Not the resonance, not biology, not genetics, something older than all of it, simpler than all of it. A family, broken, imperfect, terrified, choosing each other anyway. They moved back to Lyra's room. No one stopped them. No one tried. The palace cleared a path, walls adjusting, lights softening, as if the building itself understood that the three people moving through its corridors were not to be interrupted. Lyra walked between them, holding Theron's hand on one side, Rivara's on the other. Small steps, steady steps, the steps of a child who was relearning that the ground could be trusted. Back in the room, the warm room, the safe room, the room that had been waiting for years. They settled. Lyra sat on the floor, between them, not sleeping this time, awake, present, more present than she had been in years. Rivara sat close, close enough to touch, not touching, but close, and for the first time. Theron saw the queen allow herself to be seen, really seen. Not the ruler, not the diplomat, the woman, the mother, the person underneath all those layers of composure who had been screaming silently for years. She used to build things, Rivara said quietly, looking at the small constructs Lyra had been assembling earlier. When she was younger, before, she would build towers, bridges, cities. She would spend hours creating worlds. Theron watched Lyra, who was picking up one of the soft constructs, turning it over in her hands, studying it with an intensity that suggested she was remembering how it worked. "She's starting again," he said. "Yes." Rivara's voice was barely a whisper. "She is." And then, because the universe had decided that this day had not been enough, the final memory came. It hit Theron like a wave. Not the battlefield, not the garden, something else, something darker, more urgent. Nighttime. A corridor. Deep inside the palace, the kind of corridor that doesn't appear on official maps. The king was moving quickly, not running, but close. His breathing was controlled, but his eyes were not. They were scanning, searching. The eyes of a man who knew something was coming and was trying to outrun it. And then, a figure, ahead, blocking the corridor, silhouetted, backlit by the pale glow of the palace walls. Features obscured, but the outline was clear enough. Tall, military posture, the stance of someone who had spent decades in command, and on their hand, catching the pale light, a ring, council ring. Theron recognized it from the chamber. Every council member wore one. Identical in design, unique in authority. The king stopped. "You don't have to do this," he said. And even now, even facing what he was facing, his voice was calm, warm, the voice of a man who still believed in the person standing in front of him. "There is another way." The figure did not respond. "The resonance is not a threat," the king continued. "It is a gift, a connection. It is everything that makes us more than just efficient. It is what makes us alive." Silence then. "It is what makes us vulnerable," the figure said. And the voice, that voice, Theron knew that voice. He had heard it an hour ago, in the council chamber. Calm, measured, professional, delivering arguments about security and dependency and single points of failure. Drek. The memory accelerated, fragmented, pieces coming too fast. A flash of movement, the king reaching for something. Drek stepping forward. A sound, not loud, not dramatic. The quiet sound of betrayal. A breath that stopped being a breath. And the king, falling. Not quickly, slowly, with the deliberate weight of someone who understands what is happening and chooses to use his last seconds not fighting, but looking at Drek with understanding. He knew, he had always known it might come to this, and he chose to face it standing. The memory dissolved. Theron gasped. Back in Lyra's room. Present. Now. Heart slamming against his ribs. Lyra was watching him, her eyes clear, steady, knowing. She had seen it too. She had always seen it. Stored inside her. Locked away. The memory of her father's murder carried by a child too young to understand it and too traumatized to release it. Until now. Theron looked at her, at the calm, terrible, certain knowledge in her eyes, and understood. She knows who killed her father. She has always known. She just couldn't tell anyone, because she couldn't speak, because the grief had sealed her shut, because the one system that could have transmitted the truth had no one to transmit it to. Until a man with impossible genetics walked into a throne room, and she chose him. Not randomly, not instinctively. She chose him because he was the only person alive who could receive what she needed to give. The truth, the memory, the evidence. She didn't choose a stranger, she chose a witness, later, after Lyra had fallen asleep again, after Rivara had retreated to deal with the political aftermath. Theron sat in the dark. Kale appeared, the same way he always appeared, like a shadow deciding to have a conversation. "It's Drek," Theron said. No preamble, no build-up. "He killed the king." Kale did not react, did not gasp, did not express surprise, which told Theron that Kale had suspected, maybe for years, but suspected was not known, and known was not proven. "You saw it," Kale said. "Through the resonance, through Lyra's stored memories. I saw it. That is not evidence, not in any form the council would accept." "I know." Theron looked at him. "That's why we need her. Not me. Her. She has the memory. She's had it all along. We just need her strong enough to share it. You are asking a child to relive her father's murder. I'm not asking anything. Not yet. And when the time comes, if it comes, it will be her choice." Kael studied him for a long time, in the dark. "You are not what I expected," he said finally. "Nobody expects the emotionally compromised human diplomat," Theron replied. "That's my advantage." The faintest, smallest, most grudging almost smile crossed Kale's face, then vanished. "I need time," Theron said. "I need her stable. I need her strong. And I need the queen to know what we know. Telling the queen means forcing her to act. Telling the queen means giving her the truth. What she does with it is her choice." Another pause. "You put a great deal of weight on choice," Kale said. "It's the only thing that matters." Theron replied, "It's the only thing that separates protecting someone from controlling them." Kale considered that, then nodded, once. "I will arrange a private audience with the queen," he said. "Thank you." Kael moved toward the door. Stopped. "The general," he said, without turning around. "He was not always like this. Before the war, before the king died, he was different." "I know," Theron said. "That's what makes it worse." Kael left. Theron sat in the dark, listening to a little girl breathe, holding a coat she refused to release, carrying memories that weren't his. Tomorrow he would tell Rivara. Tomorrow he would begin the slow, careful, agonizing process of giving a child the choice to face her worst memory. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, he sat in the dark, and for the first time in years he did not feel like he was waiting for something. He felt like he had arrived, not because anyone told him to be here, because he chose to be. Part 3, Remember to Heal, Theron told the queen at dawn. Not in the throne room, not in the council chamber, not in any space designed for official business. He told her in Lyra's room, where the light was warm, where the walls didn't perform, where the only audience was a sleeping child and the soft hum of monitoring equipment. He told her everything. The corridor, the shadow, the ring, the voice, the calm, warm words of a king who knew he was about to die and chose to face it without flinching. The quiet, efficient violence of a friend who had decided that love was a vulnerability and vulnerability was unacceptable. He told her. And then he stopped talking and waited. Rivara did not move. She stood near the window, if you could call it a window. It was more like a section of wall that had decided to become transparent, offering a view of the sky outside, which was pale, colorless, the kind of sky that exists between storms, after one has passed, before the next arrives. She stood there for a long time. Theron counted, not deliberately. His brain just did it, the way brains do when silence becomes heavy enough to measure. 47 seconds. That's how long it took for the most powerful woman in the kingdom to process the fact that her husband's closest friend had murdered him. On the 48th second, she spoke. "How certain are you?" "I saw it," Theron said. "Through the resonance, through Lyra's stored memories. I felt his hand on the weapon. I heard his voice. It was Drek." Memories can be distorted. They can, but this one wasn't. It was clear, specific. The kind of memory that gets burned into a child's mind because it was the last moment she felt her father alive. Rivara's hand moved to the transparent wall, pressed flat against it, not for balance, for contact, for the feeling of something solid against her palm when everything else was falling away. He was his friend, she said. Not a question, not a denial. A fact, spoken out loud because she needed to hear it, needed to feel the weight of those 4 words against the weight of what she had just learned. He was his friend, and he killed him anyway. I know, Theron said. He held Lyra when she was born. He stood beside my husband at our joining ceremony. He, her voice thinned, stretched, like a thread being pulled too far. He wept when we lost the outer territories. He wept. People who weep can still do terrible things, Theron said, gently, not cruelly, the way you say something true when you know it's going to leave a mark. Sometimes the weeping is what drives them to it. Rivera turned from the window. Her eyes were dry, completely, fiercely, as if she had made a decision, somewhere between second 30 and second 47. That tears were not what this moment required. What do you need, she asked. Theron blinked. What? To prove it. To the council. To the kingdom. What do you need? I need Lyra. The words landed hard. Harder than he intended, because they both understood what he was asking and what it would cost. You need my daughter, Rivera said slowly, to relive her father's murder. I need your daughter to choose whether she wants to share what she carries. It has to be her choice, not mine, not yours, hers. She is a child. She is, and that child has been carrying the truth of her father's death inside her for years, alone, without anyone to share it with. That weight is part of what's destroying her. Rivera's expression sharpened, the way a blade sharpens, the way a decision takes shape. You believe releasing the memory will help her. I believe giving her the choice will help her. The memory itself. That's going to hurt. I won't pretend otherwise. A long pause, the longest yet. I've watched you for 3 days, Rivera said. I've watched how you hold her, how you speak to her, how you wait. She took a breath. You remind me of him. Theron went still. Not in appearance. She continued. Not in manner. In patience. My husband never pushed, never demanded. He waited. He trusted that the people around him would find their own way, even when it cost him. She paused. Even at the end. That sounds like it was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness, Theron said. Yes, Rivera replied. It was both. She looked at Lyra, sleeping, peaceful, unaware that the adults in her life were preparing to ask her to do the bravest thing any of them would ever do. Talk to her, Rivera said, when she's ready, not before. I won't. And Theron, he looked up. If she says no, we find another way. Agreed. Rivera held his gaze for one more second, then nodded. The nod of a queen, the nod of a mother, the nod of a woman who was choosing to trust a stranger with the most important thing in her world, because she had no other option. Or maybe, because she did. He waited 2 hours, 2 hours of sitting, watching, letting Lyra wake at her own pace, letting her stretch and blink and orient herself to the room, letting her pick up the soft constructs and begin building again. She was getting better at it. The structures more complex, more intentional, towers with bridges, bridges with pathways, pathways that connected to other towers, a network, a system, a child's instinct for connection made physical. Theron watched her build and wondered if she already knew what he was going to ask. Probably. She was connected to him, through the resonance, through whatever impossible thread ran between their nervous systems. She felt what he felt, not specifically, not in words, but in shape, in weight, in the particular flavor of heaviness that comes when someone is carrying something they need to say. So, when she finally looked at him, directly, with those clear, quiet eyes that missed nothing, he wasn't surprised, and he didn't waste her time. Lyra, he said, sitting on the floor, at her level, because that mattered. You don't talk down to someone when you're asking them something this important, no matter how small they are. She waited. There's a memory inside you, from your father. It's about the night he died. No flinch, no recoil, just stillness. The stillness of someone who already knew. I've seen parts of it, Theron continued, through our connection. I know what happened. I know who did it. Lyra's hand stopped moving. The construct she'd been building, a small bridge between two towers, hung in the air, incomplete. Here's what I need you to understand, he said. We can share that memory, show people what really happened, make sure the person who hurt your father answers for it. But it means you would have to feel it again. All of it. The whole thing. And it will hurt. He paused. Let the words settle. You don't have to do this. That's the most important thing I'm going to say today. You don't have to if you say no. That's the end of this conversation. We find another way. We take more time. We figure it out differently. No one will be disappointed. No one will be angry. Least of all me. Lyra looked at him. Then, slowly, she looked at the bridge in her hands, the unfinished one, suspended between 2 points, waiting to be completed. In the garden, she said softly. He used to hold me up so I could touch the silver leaves. Theron's chest tightened. I saw that. And then he was gone. Her voice was steady, small but steady, not the voice of a child asking for comfort, the voice of a child stating a fact she had lived with for years. And everything went quiet. She looked back at him. Her expression was not blank anymore, not distant. It was resolve, the kind that doesn't come from anger or vengeance, the kind that comes from a child who understands, on some bone-deep level, that carrying this alone has been heavier than sharing it ever could be. He would want me to be brave, she said. 5 words, spoken clearly, without hesitation, without prompting. Theron exhaled slowly. Yes, I think he would. Will you stay? Right here. Will Mom stay? Theron looked toward the entrance, where Ravara stood, half hidden, listening, trying not to interfere, trying to let her daughter make a choice without the weight of a mother's expectation pressing down on it. Ravara, Theron called softly. She stepped forward, her composure held, barely. Mom, Lyra said. And that word, that single ordinary word that billions of children say every day without thinking about it. That word broke through every defense the queen had built, every wall, every layer of royal composure, every year of performed strength. Ravara knelt, on the floor, in front of her daughter, and she was shaking. I'm here, she said. Lyra studied her mother's face, reached out, touched her cheek, gently. The way you touch something you're afraid might disappear. Stay, Lyra said. Ravara covered her daughter's hand with her own, pressed it against her cheek, and nodded. Because words, for the first time in Ravara's life, were not enough. Seni prepared the chamber, not the throne room, not the council hall, a neutral space, deep within the palace, where the walls were older, where the architecture remembered things that the newer structures had forgotten. The neural interface was positioned carefully, modified by Sene over the previous hours, calibrated not to extract, but to project, to take what Lyra carried and make it visible, audible, undeniable. Witnesses were selected, council members, guards, historians. Kale positioned himself near the entrance, not to guard it, to close it. When the time came, no one was leaving until the truth had been spoken. Drek was invited. That was Ravara's decision, not Theron's, she insisted. He will see it coming, Theron had argued. Yes, Ravara replied. He will, and that is the point. I will not condemn a man without letting him face what he has done. Even a murderer deserves that. That's incredibly principled. It is. And incredibly risky. Also, yes. So, Drek sat in the chamber, composed, alert, his council ring glinting under the ambient light, his posture the posture of a soldier, straight, controlled, ready for anything, except, maybe, the truth. They entered together. Theron, Lyra, Rivara. Lyra walked between them, not holding anyone's hand, not leaning, walking on her own, steady. The steps of someone who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it. The room noticed. Everyone noticed. Because this was not the ghost child who had drifted through the palace like smoke. This was not the silent princess who couldn't be reached. This was a small person with clear eyes and a straight spine, walking into a room full of the most powerful people in the kingdom. On purpose. Drek noticed too. Theron saw the exact moment it registered. The micro shift in the general's expression. The calculation behind the eyes. The recognition that the child he had dismissed as broken, damaged, manageable, was none of those things. The interface activated. Sene operated it with steady hands. Professional hands. The hands of someone who understood that what they were about to do would change everything, and had made peace with it. Lyra sat in the center. The device hovered near her, not touching, not intrusive, present, waiting. Theron knelt beside her. Whenever you're ready, not before. She looked at him, then at her mother, then at the room, taking it all in, every face, every eye, the weight of attention that would have crushed most adults, let alone a child. And then she looked at Drek, directly. The general met her gaze and held it, because he was brave. Whatever else he was, whatever he had done, he was not a coward. Theron understood that, hated it, but understood it. Because cowards are simple. Brave men who do terrible things are not. Lyra closed her eyes and opened the door. The memory filled the room, not like a recording, not like a projection, like a wave. It washed over everyone simultaneously. Sound, sight, feeling. The complete sensory architecture of a moment preserved in a child's mind with perfect clarity. The corridor appeared, dark, narrow, deep inside the palace. The king moved through it, his breathing controlled, his steps quick, the urgency visible in his posture but not his face. Even now, even afraid, he refused to show it. Every person in the chamber felt it. The king's heartbeat, his breathing, the weight of his awareness that something was wrong, and beneath all of it, a low, steady hum, a melody, the one he sang in the garden when his daughter reached for silver leaves. He was thinking of her, even now, running through a dark corridor towards something he might not survive. He was thinking of Lyra. The figure appeared ahead, silhouetted, tall, military-bearing, the ring on the hand catching light. And the king stopped, not because he was surprised, because he wasn't. And that was the part that broke the room. The absolute absence of surprise on the king's face. He had known, he had suspected, maybe for a long time, and he had chosen, despite knowing, to trust, to wait, to believe in the possibility that he was wrong. "You don't have to do this," the king said, and his voice, filling the chamber, warm, steady, the voice of a father, of a husband, of a leader, the voice that every person in this room remembered, that some of them had followed into war, that some of them had loved. That voice speaking to the man who was about to end it. The council shifted, not with comprehension yet, with dread. "The resonance is not a threat," the king continued. "It is a gift, a connection. It is what makes us more than efficient. It is what makes us alive." And then the other voice. "It is what makes us vulnerable." The room heard it, and the room recognized it, and every single head turned, slowly, not all at once, but in a wave, toward the same place, toward the same person. Drek did not move. He sat in his seat, his hands flat on his knees, his face completely still. He watched his own memory, his own crime, projected for everyone to see, and he did not look away. Because he was brave, and because bravery, sometimes, is just another word for refusing to accept that you were wrong. The memory continued, the flash of movement, the weapon, the impact, not loud, not dramatic, quiet, the way the worst things often are. The king fell, slowly, with the weight of someone who understood exactly what was happening, and used his last breath not to fight, not to curse, but to look at Drek with understanding, with grief, with forgiveness. The king forgave him in the last second of his life. He looked at the man who had killed him, and he forgave him. The memory dissolved, the chamber returned. Silence. Total, complete. The kind of silence that exists after something has been broken that cannot be unbroken. Lyra opened her eyes. She was crying, quietly. The way you cry when the pain is old enough to have become part of you. When the tears aren't about the moment anymore. They're about the years that came after. The years of carrying it alone. The years of silence and isolation in a world that got smaller and smaller until there was nothing left but the weight of what she knew and no one to tell. Theron held her. Ravara held her. Both of them. Together. The bridge complete. Drek stood. No one told him to. No one asked. He simply rose from his seat. Slowly. The way old soldiers stand when they have finally reached the end of something they have been marching toward for a very long time. The chamber watched. Guards tensed. Kyle's hand moved to his weapon. But Drek did not run, did not fight, did not deny. He looked at Lyra, at the small girl who had just shown the world what he had done, and something he had buried so deep that even he had forgotten it existed. Surfaced. Pain, real pain, the kind that has nothing to do with strategy or security, the kind that comes from knowing, truly knowing, that you destroyed the best thing in your life and called it duty and spent years building walls around the lie until you believed it was a fortress. I did what I believed was necessary, he said. His voice was steady, because of course it was. Decades of discipline don't disappear in a moment, but the words themselves were different. Thinner, like they had been repeated so many times they had worn through, like saying them now, in this room, in front of these people, in front of the child he had orphaned, finally revealed them for what they always were, an excuse, dressed as conviction. He trusted you, Lyra said. Every voice stopped, every breath held, because Lyra, the silent princess, the child who hadn't spoken in years, was speaking, not one word, not two, a full sentence, clear, unwavering, aimed directly at the man who had taken her father away. My father trusted you, she said, and you let him die alone. The words landed like stones, not thrown, placed, carefully, precisely, by a child who had spent years learning the shape of her grief and now knew exactly where to put it. Drek's composure cracked, not dramatically, a fracture, a single line running through the mask. And what Theron saw behind the crack was not defiance. It was recognition, the recognition of a man hearing, for the first time, the actual consequence of what he had done. Not the strategic consequence, not the political consequence, the human one, a child, his friend's child, looking at him with clear eyes and telling him the simple truth that all his justifications could not survive. You let him die alone. The resonance, Drek said, and his voice wavered. For the first time since anyone in this room had known him, it wavered. It would have consumed everything. The bond, the vulnerability. If it spread, if it destabilized, the kingdom would have fallen. You don't know that, Ravara said. I believed it. Belief, Ravara replied, is not evidence, and fear is not permission. She stepped forward, not with rage, not with vengeance, with something more devastating to a man like Drek. Clarity. You were afraid, she said, of losing control, of something you could not predict or contain. And because you were afraid, you decided that destroying the source was easier than learning to live with the uncertainty. Drek's jaw tightened. That is not protection, Ravara continued. That is not duty. That is a man who loved his friend and could not bear the possibility that his friend's gift might one day become his friend's destruction. So you destroyed him first, to spare yourself the pain of watching. The room was absolutely silent. You didn't kill him to save the kingdom, Ravara said. You killed him to save yourself, From the grief you would have felt if the residents had killed him instead. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, not softer, quieter, the way a blade is quiet when it finds its mark. I know because I have felt that same fear every day since he died. Every day I have looked at my daughter and thought, what if I lose her too? What if the residence takes her the way it took him? And every day I have wanted to do exactly what you did. Tear it out, destroy it, make her safe by making her less. Her eyes held his. But I didn't, because making someone less is not making them safe. It is making them yours, and she was never yours to protect by breaking. And there it was, the truth beneath the truth. Not strategy, not security, not the cold calculus of a general weighing risks. Love, twisted, corrupted, turned inside out until it became the very thing it was trying to prevent. Drek loved the king, and that love, uncontrolled, unexamined, fed by fear, became a weapon. Drek closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the general's shoulders dropped. Not with defeat, with release. The terrible, exhausting, devastating release of a man who has been holding up a lie so long that his arms have forgotten what they're carrying, until someone names it, and the weight becomes real. Yes, he said, one word, quiet, final. Yes. The council deliberated for less than an hour, which, by their standards, was practically instantaneous. Theron assumed it usually took them longer to decide what to have for lunch. Drek was stripped of his rank, his council ring removed, his military authority dissolved, effective immediately, permanently. But he was not executed, not imprisoned in some forgotten cell, not erased from history, because Rivara would not allow it. We do not become the thing that destroyed us, she said, to the council, to the kingdom, to herself. If we answer murder with murder, we have learned nothing, and my husband would not have wanted that. Theron watched her say it, and understood completely the strength it required. Not the political calculation, not the diplomatic maneuvering, the raw, simple, impossible strength of choosing justice over revenge when every cell in your body is screaming for the latter. Drek was exiled, sent beyond the kingdom's borders, stripped of everything, name, rank, title, legacy, but alive, because the king had forgiven him in his last breath. And Rivara decided to honor that forgiveness, even though she was not sure she shared it, even though she might never share it. That, Theron thought, is the most extraordinary act of courage I have ever witnessed, and I've watched a child stare down her father's killer. After the council cleared, after the guards escorted Drek from the chamber, after the historians began recording what had happened, after the politicians started calculating what it meant, Sene found Theron in Lyra's room, of course. Where else would he be? Lyra was building again, something larger now, more intricate, a structure with multiple levels connected by bridges, open in the center, letting light through. Sen carried a data projection, smaller than their usual ones, more contained. I need to show you something, they said. Theron looked up. If this is more bad news, I would like to formally request a delay. I've met my bad news quota for the decade. It is not bad news, Senna paused. It is complicated news. That's what people say right before delivering bad news in a fancier package. Sen activated the projection. The genetic data reappeared. Theron's markers, the ancient sequences, the extinct framework that shouldn't exist. I told you these markers showed signs of deliberate intervention, Sene said, and that based on initial analysis. The timeline appeared to be several generations. I remember. I was wrong about the timeline. Theron frowned. What do you mean? The intervention was not generations ago. It was one generation, yours. The markers were introduced directly into your system when you were very young. How young? Senna hesitated. Based on the integration patterns, the cellular age of the modifications, 3 to 4 years old. The number hit Theron strangely, not with shock, with recognition, the way you recognize a smell from childhood, or the sound of a door that used to open into a room you've forgotten. 3 to 4 years old. Hai had been sick, very sick. He remembered that. Not clearly, not completely, but in fragments. Fever, light, a hospital room, or something like a hospital room. His mother's face, frightened, hollowed out with worry, and something else. Something he had always dismissed as a dream. A tall figure, standing beside his bed in the middle of the night, when no one else was there. A hand, large, warm, placed against his chest, and a sensation. Not pain, not pressure, connection. Like something broken inside him was being mended by someone who understood exactly how it worked. Sene, Theron said slowly, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? Sene expanded the projection, highlighted specific markers, compared them to a second data set, the king's genetic signature, stored in the royal archives. They matched. Not partially, not approximately, specifically. The markers in Theron's system were directly derived from the king's genetic material, introduced deliberately, with precision that suggested not just knowledge, but care. The king, Senna said, visited the human world. This is documented. A classified diplomatic mission, 32 years ago. The details were sealed after his death. 32 years ago, Theron repeated. He was 35. Which meant the king visited the human world when Theron was 3. During that mission, Senna continued, records indicate the king made an unauthorized detour, left the diplomatic party for approximately 6 hours. No explanation was logged. When he returned, he appeared, according to the mission report, deeply affected. 6 hours. Enough time to find a dying child, to do something impossible, to leave a piece of yourself inside someone who would never know, until years later, when that piece called them home. He saved me, Theron said. Not a question. Sene nodded. The genetic evidence is consistent with a direct resonance transfer, the kind used in our oldest healing traditions. It would have cured whatever was killing you and left behind a signature. A frequency? Yes, one that Lyra's system recognized, instantly, instinctively, because it carried her father's imprint. Theron sat with that. Just sat. The room was quiet. The monitors hummed. Lyra built her bridges. And inside Theron, something that had been disconnected for 32 years clicked into place. He hadn't been chosen randomly, hadn't been selected by luck, or fate, or coincidence. A king, 32 years ago, had walked into a human hospital, looked at a dying child, and decided, without orders, without permission, without strategic justification, to save him, because that's what good men do. And now, 32 years later, that child had walked into the king's palace, held the king's daughter, carried the king's memories, and exposed the king's murderer. Not because of genetics, not because of the resonance, not because of any system or science or ancient biological framework. Because the king made a choice, and choices made with love don't end when the person who made them is gone. They keep moving, keep reaching, keep finding the people they were meant for. Even across decades, even across worlds, even when the person who set them in motion never lived to see where they landed. That's what the king did. He threw a stone into the water 32 years ago, and the ripples reached his daughter, right when she needed them most. Lyra stopped building. She looked at Theron with those clear eyes, those knowing eyes, and she smiled, small, quiet, the first real smile since her father died. And Theron understood what the smile meant, because he felt it too, through the resonance, through whatever impossible thread connected them. She had always known, not the details, not the science, not the genetic markers or the classified missions or the unauthorized detours, but the feeling, the warmth, the specific frequency of her father's love, present in a stranger's heartbeat. She didn't choose a stranger. She chose the last person her father had touched with love. Theron's eyes burned. He blinked, cleared his throat, tried very hard to maintain the composed, collected exterior he had been cultivating since he walked into this palace. Failed completely. "Okay," he said, his voice rough, uneven, absolutely not composed. "Okay, yeah." Lyra reached up and patted his cheek, the way children do when they are comforting someone bigger than them. Clumsy, gentle, devastating. "Don't cry," she said. "I'm not crying," he said, while crying. "You are. It's allergies." "No." "Fine, I'm crying." She patted his cheek again. "Good." The days that followed were not simple. Nothing about this was simple. Nothing about this would ever be simple. But the quality of the complexity changed. It was no longer the complexity of crisis, of uncertainty, of people trying to survive something they didn't understand. It was the complexity of building. Rivera addressed the kingdom, not from her throne, from the steps of the palace, in the open, where everyone could see her face and hear her voice, and watch the wind catch her hair in a way that made her look less like a queen and more like a person, which was the point. She told them the truth about the king, about Drek, about the resonance, about the child who carried it all and the stranger who helped her set it down. She told them about fear and how it grows, how it starts as something reasonable, a natural response to danger, and how if you let it, if you feed it, if you build your life around it, it becomes the very thing you were afraid of, a force that destroys what it claims to protect. She told them about her husband, how he believed in connection, in the bonds between people, in the messy, imperfect, terrifying beauty of trusting someone else with the fragile parts of yourself, and how that belief had saved a dying child 32 years ago, and that child had saved them now. And then she said something that Theron would remember for the rest of his life. "We do not heal by being strong," she said. "We heal by being present, by sitting still when everything in us wants to run, by holding on when it would be easier to let go." My daughter did not need a warrior. She needed someone willing to stay. She looked at Theron, across the crowd, across the space between them. And he stayed. In the weeks that followed, Lyra changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, the way seasons change. So gradually that you don't notice until one morning you look up and the entire landscape is different. She spoke more, not constantly, not in the chattering, breathless way some children speak. In her own way, carefully, each word chosen, each sentence built like one of her structures, precise, connected, meaningful. She played, for the first time in years, with the constructs in her room, with the responsive architecture of the palace, with the small glowing organisms that lived in the garden where her father used to sing. She laughed, not often, but enough. Enough that every time it happened, the people around her paused, just for a second, to listen, to remember what it sounded like. And she touched. That was the biggest change, the most important one. She touched. Theron first, always Theron first. He remained her anchor, her starting point, the hand she reached for when the world felt too large or too loud or too much. But then, gradually, others, Kyle, who had protected her from the shadows for years without her knowing. She walked up to him one afternoon and took his hand. He stood there, this enormous immovable wall of a man, and his chin trembled. Senne, who had monitored her vital signs for so long that they had forgotten she was more than data. She put a construct in their hands, a small bridge, and said, "You built bridges too." And Rivara, that one took time. More time than anyone wanted. More time than Rivara was prepared for. But Theron had told her from the beginning, she'll come. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she'll come. And she did. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. No ceremony, no audience, no historical significance. Lyra was building in her room. Rivara sat nearby, reading, or pretending to read, which she did a lot, because sitting near her daughter without pressure, without expectation, without needing anything, was something she was still learning how to do. Lyra finished a structure, a tall one, the most complex thing she had ever made. Towers, bridges, open spaces, light passing through, connected at every level. She looked at it, satisfied, then picked it up, carried it across the room, and placed it in her mother's hands. Ravara looked at the intricate, connected, beautiful thing her daughter had built. "It's us," Lyra said. And that was when the queen broke. Finally, completely. The composure, the control, the years of holding herself together because the kingdom needed her to, because her daughter needed her to, because there was no one else. And breaking was not an option. It was now. She pulled Lyra into her arms and held her, the way she had wanted to hold her for years, the way she had dreamed about in the dark hours when no one was watching, and the crown was just metal, and the title was just words, and she was just a mother who missed her child. Lyra held on, not to Theron, not to a stranger, to her mother. And the room, the warm room, the waiting room, the room that had been empty for years, filled. Theron watched from the doorway. He did not enter, did not interrupt, did not make it about him. He just stood there, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face, the kind of smile that comes with tears but doesn't apologize for them. Ravara looked up, over Lyra's shoulder, caught his eye. "Thank you," she mouthed. No sound. He shook his head slightly, because he hadn't done anything. Not really. He had sat in a chair, held a child, let her sleep, let her wake, let her choose, let her speak, let her show the world what she carried. He hadn't saved anyone. He had just been there, and sometimes that's the thing that saves everything. Later that evening, Ravara found him in the garden, the one from the memory, silver leaves, glass pathways, the sound of things growing. "You're staying," she said. Not a question. "I appear to be," he replied. "Your husband," he said after a moment. "He made a choice, 32 years ago, to save a kid he didn't know, in a world that wasn't his, for no reason except that the kid was dying and he could help." Ravara listened. "I've been thinking about that, about what kind of person does that. And I think the answer is the same kind of person who sings in a garden, who trusts a friend even when he shouldn't, who looks at the man who's about to kill him and forgives him." He paused. "He didn't save my life because of the resonance, or genetics, or some ancient system. He saved my life because he believed that connection matters, that one life reaching toward another life, even briefly, even imperfectly, changes something." He looked at her, and he was right. Ravara stood beside him, in the garden her husband had loved, under the silver leaves their daughter used to reach for. "Yes," she said, "he was." They stood there for a while, not speaking, not needing to. Two people who had been broken by loss and were learning, slowly, imperfectly, that the pieces don't go back together the way they were. They go back together differently. A knock at the garden entrance, soft, familiar. Lyra stood there, pajamas, bare feet, one of her constructs in her hand, a small bridge. She held it up. "For you," she said, looking at Theron. I took it, carefully, like it was made of something precious, which it was. "Thank you." She looked between them. Theron, Ravara, back again. Then she walked forward and took each of them by the hand, one on each side, the way she had walked through the corridors days ago, balanced, connected. "Theron," she said, "yeah, my father chose you. I know. And I chose you. I know that too. And Mom chose you. Well, your mom chose not to have me deported. I'm counting that as a win." Lyra's mouth twitched, the edge of a smile, the beginning. "Do I get a room," he asked, "or am I still classified as adaptive furniture?" Rivara allowed a small, real smile, the first full one he'd seen from her. You will have a room, with a window, with a window, that the building won't rearrange in the middle of the night. No promises. Lyra laughed, quietly, the comfortable laugh of a child standing between two people she trusted. In a garden where her father used to sing, under silver leaves she could almost reach again. The palace glowed in response, not dramatically, not performatively, the way a house warms when the people inside it are finally home. Somewhere in the distance, the garden's organisms hummed, a frequency that sounded, if you listen closely, almost like a melody, almost like a song a king used to sing to his daughter when the silver leaves caught the light and the world was still whole. Lyra heard it. Theron could tell by the way her grip tightened, just for a second, then relaxed, not because she let go of the memory, but because the memory no longer hurt to hold. That was the difference. That was everything. Theron looked down at the small bridge in his hand, then at the child holding on to him, then at the queen standing beside them in the garden where everything had once been perfect and might someday be something close to it again. He had arrived as an outsider, a name on a list that someone else had put there, a stranger in a room that glowed and judged and breathed. He stayed because a child chose him, because a queen trusted him, because a dead king 32 years ago had reached across the distance between worlds and decided that one small life was worth saving. And it was. Not because of what that life would do someday, not because of genetics or prophecy or ancient systems waking from long sleep, because every life is worth saving. Every connection matters. Every hand that reaches toward another hand in the dark changes something. That's not magic. That's not science. That's just what happens when someone decides to